Hello, welcome to the Agency Download Podcast, where we have real conversations about the advertising and marketing industry. I'm your host, James Williams, and joining us today is Aaron Strout, former CMO of Real Chemistry, managing partner of Ardwolf, and host of the Reaching Higher podcast. Aaron's built his career helping brands cut through the noise with integrated marketing strategies that actually work. Aaron, thanks so much for being here. It's an absolute honor to have you on the show today.
Well, thanks for having me, James. And it's always fun as someone that does a lot of podcasting to be interviewed on these shows. And I think it makes the conversation that much richer. And I appreciate the warm intro.
Yes, absolutely. And huge shout out to the Reaching Higher podcast. I was listening to some episodes earlier this week and super, really fun, interesting, inspirational conversation. So amazing what you're doing over there on your end.
Thank you.
Obviously, on this podcast, we love talking about advertising marketing. That's our goal. That's our focus. That's what we like to talk about. That's all I do and spend all my time and energy on. And you are an absolute veteran in the space. Obviously, you're kind of in a transition period, which we'll probably get in today, but would love to hear people's stories, how they got into marketing and advertising and all of that. Would love if you could just share kind of your story, how you entered the marketing industry and how you kind of carried up through the ranks.
Yeah, I have a long version, which I'll spare you and all the listeners. The Reader's Digest is probably one of the more non traditional routes into marketing. Basically, started with me in high school. I was good at a lot of different things, but I wasn't great at any one thing. One of the things I really liked was languages. I took French for about 8 years. Going into college, UMass Amherst. This is a time where it was the Soviet Union at the time, and there was a guy named Gorbachev who was leading the charge, and they were starting to open things up. And I thought, oh, let me take some language courses, some economics. Fast forward, got through 4 years of that. I was in my second year of grad school, actually my first year of grad school at Georgetown. The wheels fell off, the Soviet Union dissolved, and so I went from learning out of history books to learning out of the newspapers. So, 92, so yes, that tells you just how old I was, and I was young when I was in school. I had had the good fortune of a dad that was a computer programmer, and so I learned how to do computing before the World Wide Web even existed and became the de facto IT guy in a lot of different instances. So I was actually doing a consulting job working for a woman at a financial services software firm. My contract was just about up. She said, Aaron, my parents run a direct marketing agency. The person who's their lead account guy and more importantly, their IT guy just quit to go to Hill Holiday. If you'd be willing to go there, they'll teach you how to do marketing if you can keep the internet up and working and the email and all that stuff. So I did. So I learned marketing, not through school, but in my direct marketing agency. I stayed there for about 2 years, learned HTML, like back when you had to hand code everything, but also learned the principles of direct marketing and took those on the road and went to Fidelity Investments. And that was the start of my career doing digital marketing there.
Amazing. And you obviously seen this huge change in evolution of the digital kind of landscape where you went, like you said, you went from learning HTML code on your own, figuring out now we can type a prompt and get a whole set of HTML code. Could you just highlight? Because I think there's foundational principles where marketing still works, but the technology is always changing, right? Like, what are the principles you've seen work regardless of the technological or media landscape that continue to work in marketing today and also worked back?
So, it's an interesting question and juxtaposed with the fact that you mentioned you've listened to a few of the Reaching Higher podcast episodes. The premise of the show is influential people doing societal good. And why I bring that up is one of the gentlemen I had on the show was Craig Newmark, who is the founder of Craigslist, that sort of marketplace we all use. And why I'm going to give you this example is I interviewed Craig 20 years ago and then had the pleasure of interviewing him just recently. And one of the things I remember asking him back in, I think it was 2007, was even at the time, Craigslist was a very simple, very stripped down site. And I'm like, why don't you have something that looks better like, Yahoo has or ESPN? And he said, you know what? I'm a big believer in sort of usability, so UX. And I feel like sometimes it's easier just to have something that functions well that isn't bells and whistles and super fancy. So I guess that's a little bit of a long-winded answer to the question. I think usability still leads the way. And so something can be beautiful, it can be complicated, but if it's not easy to use, and people tend not to use it. And we know that a lot of the generations that are sort of extending the use of iPhones and laptops, now are in their 60s, 70s, 80s, and they need to be able to have things pretty, they don't have great vision sometimes, or they're not that tech savvy. So I think it really does boil down to, is it usable? Is it easy to sort of navigate? And if it's not, then doesn't matter how great the code was behind it or how great the design is.
Yeah, that's the really good insight because I think that even applies to even wider things like content or like they say write your content at a fourth or fifth grade reading level, and that's not to look down on people that they can't read above that, but it's because people live busy lives
Hmm.
and they need to be able to consume and understand things quickly, and so I think that really that principle can apply to all different types of
Totally.
business, right? And marketing tactics and solutions. So that's really an overarching strategy that can apply to a lot of things. What were some of the big milestones throughout your career that really shifted things and moved things forward that looking back, you didn't realize was going to be the shift that took you to another level or the right door opening? But how do you look back at all now and kind of shocked by the big doors that opened up that you weren't expecting at the time?
Well, it's funny, and I don't mean to keep spoiling things because I know we have a section at the end to share what we're excited about or working on. I am working on a book, and one of the things that I'm sort of doing is codifying a lot of the life lessons that I've had over the course of my journey. And because I've been doing marketing for 30 plus years, and I did start my career sort of in the very, very early days of the internet, 1994, like the World Wide Web just sort of had become a thing. You didn't have the luxury of Google, you didn't have ChatGPT, you didn't have Instagram, all these things. And so I've had the opportunity as I've looked back over past blog posts, et cetera, to relive some of these memories. So I think there are a few milestone points. So one was leaving Fidelity after being there for 9 years because this thing called social media was going to take hold. And I saw it coming. This was not, you had Facebook, but Facebook was only for college kids, and Twitter did not exist yet. A lot of the other sites did not exist. And so I left Fidelity and went to a online community company because I wanted to be able to do social media. And one of the first things I did is I taught myself to blog. So this is 2006. I started doing podcasting back then and didn't really know what I was doing, but sort of, tried to fake it till I made it. So I think those were the initial phases of it. I then started to think a lot about the idea of like location based marketing. I went on to write a book with a gentleman named Mike Schneider. He goes by Schneider Mike. It was way too early, but it was location based marketing for dummies, one of the Wiley books. So that was a big deal because we felt like that was going to be a thing. It was never as big a thing as social, ultimately mobile. It was a flavor of mobile. And then I would say my career at Real Chemistry, where I still do some consulting for them, but I departed as the chief marketing officer about a year ago, having the opportunity to build something from a $45 million company to, when I left, it was a $3 billion valuation on the company, or I think 220 people when I joined and 2,400 people when I left. And I don't say that to like brag, but it made me proud to partner with a team of really incredible people. Jim Weiss, who's our founder and CEO, now chairman, Bob Pearson, and others, to like take some of these unorthodox principles of digital, of great content, of social media, and then combining them with things like analytics and good old marketing insights and applying them to build our client base and to build great campaigns for our clients and to sort of put something into the world that no one had really put into the world before. I could go on, but I know that I don't want to bore people, but hopefully those are some interesting little tidbits that have come along.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, clients always want solutions, right? And it's about as smart business people and marketers is that we're always looking for solutions. And what I love about what you kind of said and broke down was when you got access to HTML, you jumped right in and figured out HTML. When you heard about social media, you jumped right in and figured out how social media communities were working. When you jumped into geo, location, local marketing, you figure that out. And I think that's a good mindset where people just need to continue to have is that the technology, underlying technology and landscape is going to continue to change. But having the mindset of I'm going to figure it out and be solution oriented and solve problems for other people because other people are busy. And so they don't have time to figure out every single technology and landscape and everything. And so I think, well, a lot of people are freaking out about AI and it's going to take all the jobs. And I don't know how, what career opportunities there are. there's always new problems, I think, that are going to need to be solved. And I think what you just explained and broke down is like milestone after milestone of a new technology creates actually a new opportunity. And I think we're just going to continue to evolve in that landscape. But what do you kind of see as the next horizon? Obviously, AI is huge, figuring out solutions and services there. But I know you kind of in a transition period. But when you look at the marketing, advertising, industry and you saw the evolution of HTML and social media and everything, what do you kind of see as that next big hurdle and opportunities that are going to be there for the next decade?
Yeah, I mean, the good news is I am still working with a few different clients, including Real Chemistry. So I do try to stay current. I do try to, go to conferences and engage with smart people that are helping to move the ball forward. So it's one of the things, to your point about jumping in with the tools, I try to always learn and, have that learning mindset. So I think obviously generative AI is a big one. I won't go, too poetic in that. Although it's interesting because I have a friend, and when asked about, what's the impact, he said when Photoshop came out, all the creatives thought that that was going to put them out of a job. And turned out it was like a tool that made them, better, faster, more powerful, but didn't put anyone out of a job. If you were good, you were good, but this made you better. I think AI is one of those things. Yes, there are jobs that will be taken over by that, but it will allow us to allocate to higher value. I think the things that are coming down the pike are when I was at Fidelity, and I'm going to use this metaphor, we had a guy that was our chief mobile officer. And so I joined Fidelity in 97. I left in '06. Literally almost every single year he'd come, he's like, "This is the year mobile. This is the year mobile. This is the year mobile." And every year we're like, this is not the year mobile yet. And it was cool. People were experimenting, Blackberries and sort of rudimentary cell phones were starting to come out, but it really wasn't. And so where I'm going with this is I think virtual reality, augmented reality, those are things that are going to start to have a profound impact on what we do. And if I'm a betting man, it's probably more augmented reality than virtual. We've seen these new Oakley, they have a combo product with Meta,
Yeah.
the goggles
Ray-Ban.
that are coming out, the Ray Bans, right? That's
Yeah.
the one. Thank you. And I think it's things like that that are functional that can sort of overlay information and help do the things that we want to do are going to make a significant sort of impact on the way we experience our jobs as well as our personal lives.
Yep, absolutely. Yeah, I think that technology always displaces jobs in industries, but it creates whole new environments. And so I think there's always the doomers out there that look at the pessimistic side of it's going to collapse everything and nothing's going to work or function. And people probably they said that about Photoshop and they said about every up the internet and everything else. But generally, there's things that increase and get created that are unforeseeable right now that we can't imagine. So I think that's what's going to continue to happen. And yeah, I think the what's going to happen to the device and mobile, like so that time when you were talking about mobile, that was pre 2008, that was pre iPhone.
Pre iPhone, yeah. So the closest you got was there was something called the Treo, and it was sort of like the precursor to the iPhone. It had a color display. It was starting to do some of the cool things, but had nowhere near the, sort of functionality and the resolution and the processing power that the iPhone had.
Right. So it took the iPhone post 2008 is when the mobile revolution really took over. And obviously, like I live in the media buying space. And so what we're always focused on is where are people spending time on media? Where can we reach and engage them? Where are people hanging out online or in the real world that we can follow them with ads? Because advertisers want to reach and engage with consumers. And that's what we're always focused on. And that's what we're always trying to look at is like, what's the next big hurdle or next transition that consumers are going to go spend time? I agree. I think the screens are going to continue to diminish and we're going to go to more things like augmented reality. VR is less about screens and more about real world digital experiences.
Yep. I
I think
totally agree.
absolutely see any type of big challenges and how did you handle challenges throughout your career? Things not working out the way you thought they may have worked out and did it end up being a blessing in disguise or how did you handle different challenging situations throughout your
Yeah, it's a good question, and I'm going to make a distinction because I'm a big believer. I had a executive coach named Milo that taught me these things. There's a difference between a mistake and a failure. A failure is when you don't actually learn to stop making that mistake. If it's a mistake, you can actually take a tremendous amount from it. It can be painful. And so one example I had was early days of Real Chemistry. It was called W2O at the time. I had not moved into the chief marketing role. I was the president of one of our divisions called WCG. And one of the things I was responsible for was technology clients. So I won't name names, but it was a B2B tech company out of the Northeast. And we essentially we got in the door and all of a sudden they wanted to grow like crazy. We were in with their chief marketing officer. They were doing like an evolution of their brand and sort of were up. There was an upheaval across the entire spectrum. Well, he also had this pet project where he was doing a documentary. The documentary was more expensive than he expected. It started to rub the owners of the company the wrong way. And then all of a sudden, this person turned around and said to us, I know we've spent all this money, but we didn't need to spend it here. We didn't really spend it there. So all of a sudden, we started to sort of be on our heels. Now, the problem was because I saw this is one of our fastest growing accounts, and we were doing PR and marketing and design and all these different pieces. I had overinvested in it, right? So, meaning you do some work and you're like, we may not get paid for this, but this is going to lead to more and more. So, I kind of bet the farm on this. We did get paid, but let's say it was a $3 million project. We get paid like 1.8 million of the 3 million. So that's a pretty big write off when you think about how much it is. It led to a number of meetings with our CFO and our CEO. It was very uncomfortable, but I was accountable. I apologized. I told them like what my sort of risk reward spectrum looked like and the fact that I had made a bet and I should have probably reeled that bet in and probably had them in the loop sooner and not been so Pollyanna. So I will tell you, like, I remember that to this day of as I'm evaluating opportunities and thinking about risk reward, always looking around those corners to the degree that I can. And it's one of the things that I try to recommend to other people. Always good to take risks, but don't get out ahead of your skis because it can land you in a very uncomfortable position.
Yeah, absolutely. Especially when it comes to anything finances, always puts even more heavier pressure on everything. I think that the challenge always, though, right, that I've at least experienced in my own career is that you never have all the answers, right? Like you
You
have
never
to
do.
make a bet at some point, and if
Hmm.
you wait until everything's in line, then oftentimes that opportunity has been lost. Either a competitor's taking an advantage, or it's just gone. It's not going to work anymore. So the timing of things is always challenging in terms of when's the right time to jump into something, even if you don't have all the information versus managing the risk reward. But it sounds like the biggest thing you took that it sounds like you did there was extreme ownership, right? One of my favorite books is from Jocko, Extreme Ownership. You just owned up to the situation, which I think a lot of people need to learn and do.
Yeah, it's a lesson I learned early, and it was something where, you always like I don't want to say you always want to blame someone, I always wanted to give context, and so it wasn't necessarily blaming somebody else, but I did find, and our founder Jim Weiss did say like, if you own it, you'll get the pain past you so much faster because then all of a sudden it's like, okay, what can we do to remedy this, and what do we learn from it, and how do we move on, versus like spending time backpedaling and wasting revs. So yeah, I couldn't agree more with that.
Yeah, especially in the corporate world, one of the especially from somebody outside looking in, that I've always worked in small, very boutique, independent agencies, but corporate always seems to be the concern is always people are pointing fingers. Everyone's trying to blame everybody else. Nobody wants to take accountability. So I think at least that's what I hear, and some of the experiences and stories I've heard from people I know that work in corporate is that a lot of people try to avoid that responsibility and
Totally.
accountability.
Yep.
What do you kind of see? What's the biggest hurdles and challenges you think that are out there for advertisers, brands that are trying to market in today's age, 2025, going into 2026? What are kind of the biggest challenges you see facing them?
Well, I think it's twofold, right? And I'm sure as someone that works in the media buying space, it's the fragmentation of, right? So you have not only a million different streaming services or a million different podcasts or audio platforms, you have all these different video or sort of, micro TikTok, reels slash Instagram and things like that. And so it's trying to figure out like, where does your audience live? How do you get in front of them? How do you actually be relevant in front of them? I think the other one, just to bring it back to generative AI, is the tools are evolving so quickly and changing the landscape so quickly. It's really hard to keep up with what the tools are doing. I mean, ChatGPT, I feel like they come out with like a different new version every 3 or 4 months, which is good. But that pace of technology makes it really difficult to sort of stay out ahead of it. So I think it's figuring out how to stay in at least in pace with that, and really understanding how do I find my audience, and knowing that you're not ever going to find one channel that's going to satisfy, and also knowing that you're not going to just assume it's like, oh, well, if it's Instagram or it's TikTok, it's younger people, or if it's on LinkedIn, it's, business people that are 25 to 55 or whatever. It's like, no, actually stop and do your homework, because you'd be surprised at who shows up where, and what the best place is to get in touch with them.
Yeah, absolutely. I couldn't agree more. That's where I think that AI is gonna help catch up people, is that
Hmm.
it's actually gonna take that level of advancement in production by using the AI platforms in order to get the personalization and all the different content created. I think, like, those go it goes almost hand in hand because, like you said, media fragmentation, there's a lot of platforms, there's a lot of people, a lot of attention seeking from everybody on every channel, and we live in the attention economy. Is that if you can create more personalized content and more content that is on brand, speaks to your story as a brand, your benefits to the consumer, and really relates to not just a broad stroke 25, 54 women that live on the West Coast, but is specific to their needs, expectations, wants, and are able to produce more and more content like that powered by AI and real content and a good strategy, then I think you can win. I don't think many have solved that problem
No.
because it's very hard, but I think that's what the AI platforms are going to be able to do. And that doesn't mean that you're not going to have any people involved in doing that. Somebody's got to push the buttons, to say it easy, but somebody's got to know how to use all the platforms and have a higher level strategy. So that's what we always look for, is what's the overarching strategy, and then how do humans and machines execute the tactics. Have you experienced that throughout your kind of career, and like what you see kind of working now is we can't lose sight of the strategy, just focus on tactics, or just expect the algorithms and the AI platforms to work, but you have to have the humans and the strategy to really lead and point things in the right
Yeah.
direction.
Yeah, and I think what's confusing people now is they think for the first time the tools can help them do the strategy or replace the strategy, and certainly generative AI is getting better at being more strategic, more so than I'd say any other tool or technology or platform we've had in the past. But I am a huge believer that it is still important to be human led, technology assisted. And, there may be certain rote activities or even more complex activities that once you sort of get the process fine tuned, and they can run and they will do their job. But you do run a risk. And I mean, I think any one of us that has ever used generative AI, if you've seen it hallucinate, and it does still a lot, it can be very embarrassing if you're not fact checking your work, or, making sure that it's not sort of gone down the wrong path and leads you. There's a joke where it's like, you set sail for, let's say, Hawaii, and if you're 1 degree off, by the time you get there, you're, 5,000 miles south of the island, even though it feels like you're only 1 degree off and you're sailing. So I feel like AI has that possibility of doing that in the workplace for us.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the biggest changes we've seen in the media buying space is the lead for more, better creative. Is that the algorithms have gotten so good at targeting the ideal audience, is that the creatives really leading the edge of who the ad gets served to, because it optimizes so fast on deciding that this creative is meant for this percentage of the population, this creative meant for this population, and this is what resonates better. But you only can do that if you have enough creative that are speaking to different audiences. And I think that's going to be a big change, is developing more creative, more ads and content that are speaking to specific types of people and personas, rather than broad general advertising where you take a 30-second spot, put it on TV, chop it up for Facebook and Instagram, TikTok. I think those days are coming to an end, or at least you can still do it. It's just not going to work as well. You're not going to stretch your dollars very far that way.
Totally.
What's kind of, let's see here. So let's talk a bit about your kind of podcast and that transition of what kind of motivated you to transition to that podcast. Like you mentioned before, it's about really inspirational characters and their stories and what they're doing. What kind of motivated you to start the podcast and share all those messages and that type of content?
Yeah, I appreciate you asking. So I've been podcasting for about 20 years. And so what I learned about podcasting is, one, it's my own masterclass in getting to talk to people that are far smarter than me. But it's also taught me things like being able to do deep listening, and I think be better about speaking, on my feet. so that if you're talking to someone, being able to come up with things and not umming and ahhing your way through it. I'm sure, you seem to do a great job at it, James. This particular one, when I was leaving Real Chemistry, because I had a podcast called the Real Chemistry Podcast, we had a lot of influential guests on there, but because we also focus exclusively on healthcare, I wanted to be able to do something wider than just healthcare. And so I happen to know a lot of people in healthcare, and I would say probably a third to half of my guests to date are people that do work there. But I wanted to have like Jerry Zucker, who directed the movie Airplane and Ghosts, and I wanted to be able to have Aloe Black, who also is now a biotech CEO, but I wanted to be able to also inspire because we're living through, not getting political, but very tribalistic times, right? Where people are not, they want to poke each other in the eyes without really getting to know one another. And I thought, if there's some sort of inspirational message that I could help deliver, like, why wouldn't I want to do that? And so for me, it's bringing all those different things together and being able to put some positivity into the world at a time where I feel like it needs it most. And that's really the goal behind the Reaching Higher podcast.
Amazing. I love it. Yeah. A lot of keyboard warriors in there that want to stay behind the curtains and not get out in front and talk to people. When you talk to people, you realize you have a lot more in common than
That's right.
you don't. What's been kind of your favorite journey of that? Any big favorite podcast episode topic? What's been kind of some of the highlights of it?
Yeah, it's funny. I've really enjoyed all of them. I would say there are a couple that stand out more than others. One of which was this woman, Liana Guzman, who is the CEO of a company called Folks Health. And not only is she doing a lot to help with her platform, the LGBTQ plus community, she just was a lovely person and smart and just like so much EQ. Similar in that vein, Chuck Leavell, who's the keyboardist of the Rolling Stones, but also does conservationists ism. Just an amazing guy and like so soulful, and the stories he tells about rock and roll. I played back with the Allman Brothers early days. And then my one of my first ones that I did that I really loved was Mallory McMorrow, who's running for the U.S. Senate seat in Michigan. She's funny. She's not a sort of lawyer, so not a classically trained politician, but really all of them have different pieces to them that are really beautiful and fun and funny and soulful. It's like telling someone to pick their favorite child.
Yeah, I hear you. There's just the amount of stories and different perspectives and people you meet by just having real conversations is quite amazing and fun to do. And the best thing is you get to share it with everybody. So
Totally. Yeah.
I've totally enjoyed some of your podcasts. Have been very fun.
Well, thank you.
What about your book? I know you're coming out with a book. What's the premise of the book? Could you kind of break down and share premise, ideas, thoughts around all that?
Yeah. Well, the good news is a lot of what we're weaving through here is part of what the book is. So it's called Wired for Purpose. It's coming out in hopefully late January of 2026, maybe early February. We're trying to land the date right now. And it's the life lessons that I took away, I'd say, looking at going from analog to digital, social, mobile to generative AI. It's how I've used things like being thankful and sort of rewarding people and sort of spending time reaching out to them in a way that maybe not everyone does. I'm one of those guys where I might see it's your birthday today on Facebook. So I take a little video and I text it to you versus just doing the happy birthday, James, on Facebook, or singling someone out after an event and saying, hey, thank you for your contribution. And then just my approach to networking, which has had a lot to do with podcasting and content creation and things like that. So getting to meet some amazing people and not making it about me. It's not a memoir. It's about, I learned these things from some really amazing leaders. How can I sort of create frameworks and life lessons and give those to you? And what took me 30 years to accomplish, maybe you can do in, 3 months or 3 years or whatever. So shortening that cycle for them and helping them be better at their professional as well as personal lives.
Amazing. I think that's always what the power is of a book or listening to a podcast is that you learn something that took maybe somebody 5, 10, 15, 20 years to learn, and they can condense it in an hour or 2 hours or a couple hours, and you can learn from it and apply it today. So, one of the biggest powers of always continuing to learn and develop. Have you always had that mindset? Because it sounds like throughout your career, one of the biggest things I've gotten just out of this short conversation we've had is that we've already kind of talked about this bit, but you've always had this ability to learn and grasp new trends, new topics, new things that are happening. Even if maybe mobile was too early, you still figured it out, probably learned something that opened up another door for you. What do you think sparked that interest and that intrigue of always being open minded to learning new technological innovations or changes?
Well, first of all, I'll say thank you. That's a huge compliment for you to acknowledge that because it is how I live my life. And I'm not sure people always see that as part of the driving force, but it has been something. This is going to sound unorthodox, but my mother, when she was in high school, she lived in a small town in Maine, Windham, Maine, and her family had a exchange student from Norway, which it was a little bit unusual to have that happen. This is back in the 60s, early 60s, but to have it happen in rural Maine was particularly rare, and so why I tell you this story is this woman ultimately came back, became very close friends with the family, almost really like an aunt to me, married my dad's best friend. They had 3 kids, we became very close with them. This opened up a whole different world to me, so I went to Norway when I was 4 years old, and again, this is 1972. Very few people who were 4 years old from Maine were flying over to Norway and spending the summer over there. I think that combined with my dad got into technology early days. He was a computer programmer back in the mid to late 60s. And so he kind of understood how machines thought and taught me how to do that. The last piece of the puzzle was he was huge into music. So my first albums included The Doors, The Beatles, Jimi Hendrix, all of these different bands, and then that evolved, and he was always very encouraging of listening to new music. So I think I've tried to apply that learning, as you said, agenda and sort of that openness to everything that I do in my life, and that includes, constantly playing with new social media platforms and new technologies. And you also said something very important, not just being like, let me throw stuff against the wall, but being strategic about it. So if I'm applying it from a professional perspective, how can I use this in a meaningful way and doing a lot of experiments along the way. So
Yep, and experimenting and testing is the only way to really learn and know if something's gonna work is having that mindset of if I do A, what happens? What's the outcome? How does that impact everything? Not always easy to measure sometimes, especially in the marketing space and the
mhm.
business space, but always is an effective approach. Um, I love that a lot. If you were to look back on your earlier like career and life, what would be the number one thing you'd recommend to yourself early in your career that would have helped you out throughout your entire career?
There's so many that could have helped me out throughout my career. And it's interesting because one of the exercises my publisher had me do was to write a letter to my younger self. So there were a lot of people told me that I was probably overcritical of myself. But in thinking about your question ahead of time, I think the thing I wish that I had stuck with more is early days, that direct marketing mindset. I wish I had leaned more into the whole like account-based marketing, demand gen marketing, because I leaned more into thought leadership and brand building and things like that, which are all very important. But there is an element of that sort of demand gen and being able to target and sort of really get people to do what you want that I would say is probably even more valuable in today's landscape. And so I know it well enough and I've certainly applied it, but I wish that I kind of doubled down on that earlier days and really stuck with that because I think it would have helped me do an even better job than, at a lot of the things that I did over the course of my career.
Do you think that was a result of just influence in your life at that time that you had people who influenced you more towards the thought leadership brand building compared to the more direct response demand gen type
Yeah,
of
I
approach?
don't think I thought of it, but that definitely played a role, and I think there was a little bit of a looking down your nose at the time too, where it's like, I wanna go and do these big events, and I wanna write, movies or blogs or, whatever, and it's like, no, this is the stuff that's actually the lifeblood of most companies. So it's the less sexier side, but I would argue it's become maybe the most important aspect of it.
Yeah, especially for new startups in tech have taken that direct response mindset and model to another level. And so I think it's gotten even more popular that the brand building thought leadership seems to be for larger legacy brands that can do it and smaller up and coming brands or startup or tech firms need to focus just on. But I see value in doing both is that there's
Totally.
a brand direct response because a brand gives you that wider appeal and that bigger strength to grow. And a direct response kind of gives you immediate results and impact and more of a dedicated, measurable strategy to growing. But I think you need both, especially in this day and age, especially when we can track everything from TV all the way to mobile ads. Everything in between is trackable and measurable. And so the direct response component is huge to have on layered underneath a wider, bigger brand and
Couldn't agree
storytelling.
more. Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
Um, especially that the storytelling's been kind of one of the biggest things that I keep continuing to hear from creatives. What's your kind of opinion of how brands build in today's day and age? Is it focusing on entertainment type content ads? Is it building and having this integrated storytelling model between multiple different platforms? What do you think's the best approach to brand building today?
Well, storytelling, is and continues to be the most important thing. And I'll give you sort of two quick examples. So I think there are something like 800,000 different wine producers in the world.
Hmm.
And the reality is that a lot of people buy probably the same 2 or 3 or 4 wines, and they do because they had some connection with it, that they either went on a wine tasting, they had it at a friend's house, it was given as a gift, and a lot of it has to do with that storytelling that the brand itself did or the storytelling that they tell themselves and their guests. The other piece of it is there's a lot of content out there that's interesting, it's funny, TikTok does a great job at it, but like dog fails or, people shooting each other in the back with like pellet guns or whatever. It might be funny, but it's not selling you something. And while I hate to sort of mention this brand, although I use them literally daily, if not multiple times daily, Amazon has a commercial out right now, and it's basically these 3 older women, and they're sledding, and the backdrop is this Beatles song, and the whole idea is the nostalgia of remembering what it was like to sled when they were younger girls, and so they order from Amazon, they get these sleds, they've got these, comfy cushions in them, they ride down the hill, they're not saying anything to each other, but you totally understood, like, the power of what it was trying to get across, and I'm like, that is, like, the perfect element of storytelling. It's visually pleasing. As a guy that likes the Beatles, I appreciated the fact that, it had that sort of Beatles song playing in the background. So I'm a big believer in the fact that storytelling is king, but you really have to be purposeful in terms of how you're telling the story and how it connects with what you're trying to accomplish.
I think the brand building and having that overarching strategy on top of the brand, like we were talking about earlier, is the key to success for having that consistent message across all those different creative and content. And it takes smart, thoughtful leadership and not just tactics in order to do that. But your example of the wine, it totally made me think my wife still will mainly only buy Justin wine, which is like from Paso Robles and
I know it well. Great
in
wine.
California. And,
Yep.
she is dedicated to that. I gotta ask her now why she buys Justin. When was their first glass that she had? And it was probably at some event. She had a great time, and there's an association. And that's really what a lot oftentimes brand's all about is what is your brand associated with, from a consumer's perspective, and how do you develop that? But
Totally.
last question I have for you, would love to know what is your kind of next horizon? I know you have the book, you have your podcast, but what are you looking forward to? What are you motivated about now for the next coming years?
Well, I think what I'm trying to do is culminate the platform I'm developing with the podcast, with the book. I'm going to start doing more speaking as a result of that. And I really want to help that lead to build a movement. So I have a few different healthcare, like menopause. My wife has been hard hit by it. A lot of friends have. There's not nearly enough sort of education and information and studying out there of how to fix it or mitigate it. Glioblastoma, which is a brain cancer that was the cancer that took my mother-in-law's life as well as an aunt and uncle, and the last is Alzheimer's slash memory loss, and my dad and my grandmother were both impacted by that. So I probably won't try to tackle all three, but using these platforms to say how can I make an impact in the world and society. And I know that may sound like pretty far-fetched, but I have had the luxury of meeting a lot of very cool people, hosting a lot of them on the podcast, and I think I'll get a chance to continue to meet a lot of other very interesting people. And hopefully, I can live the spirit of my own podcast of doing societal good by using all of those forces for good.
I think it's amazing, and somebody's gotta do it. Somebody has to be the change, and we all have an opportunity to make an impact, small ways to large ways. Everybody can make it a better impact for change, so I think that's amazing, and more of and a very motivating, purposeful, mission. Amazing to hear that. Would love for you to just share how people can connect with you, how can they work with you, anything you wanna plug.
Yeah, so I'd say one, I selfishly would love for you to check out the Reaching Higher podcast, and you can either Google it. It's on all the major platforms. I do have a website, which is reachinghigherpod.com. If people want to follow me or connect with me on LinkedIn, I'm just Aaron Strout on LinkedIn, and I come up pretty prominently. Those are probably the best places. I am on Instagram, both personally as well as the Reaching Higher Pod. So if you just search for Aaron Strout on both, I try to have a mix of personal life and business life. And yeah, and then you can find me through the website if you want to reach out to me. So that's me in a nutshell.
Awesome. Thank you so much for doing this. It was an honor.
Thank you, James. It was a lot of fun.